In 1614, Nicolas Hermont was born outside of Paris, France. He lived a seemingly unremarkable childhood. He left home and joined the army, fought in several battles. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. And we don't know for certain, but it's assumed that he was injured in one of those battles. And then during his life as a soldier, he had a remarkable religious conversion experience. He didn't hear voices, he didn't see a vision. He was out with his troops. They were in a field by a tree, and he was looking up at this tree, and it was winter. And remember what trees look like in winter. They look like they're dead, right? There's no leaves, there's no flowers, there's no fruit, there's just sticks, right? And he's looking up, and he's looking at this tree that is just sticks. And he has this realization that he is the tree. The tree is like him. He is like dead. And, but just like that tree would in a few months' time, when spring came, begin to leaf and maybe flower and maybe start to bear fruit or nuts or something like that, he realized that he too could be brought to life by God, by Christ. And so he left his job in the army. He went and he joined a monastery in Paris. He became a Discalced Carmelite monk. You probably have never heard of a Discalced Carmelite monk, but you've probably seen them because they're kind of iconic for monks. Discalced means, it's from the Latin, it means without shoes. These are the monks who didn't wear shoes, they wore sandals. So if you ever saw like a classic picture of a monk in the habit wearing sandals, that is a Discalced monk. So Nicolas Hermont joins the Discalced Carmelites. He becomes, as you usually do when you enter a monastery or a convent, he changes his name. And so for the rest of his life, he is known as Brother Lawrence. And he wasn't like really skilled, you know, I mean, he was a soldier, but he didn't have like any other life skills. Monasteries, by the way, in those days weren't just places where you just went and prayed. They were like incredible work sites. I mean, there was like work going on. It was a community center. It was usually the place where the largest fields were and where like commerce happened. And like what could Brother Lawrence do? Well, he couldn't do much, so they put him in the kitchen. And so he did some cooking, but mostly he was the dishwasher. And he did that for decades until his body could no longer handle it, until he could no longer stand. And then they gave him a sitting down job at the end of his life where he helped make the sandals that the brothers would wear. But for most of his life, he's a dishwasher cook. And which, I mean, is as unremarkable as you could probably possibly get. Except people started noticing in the monastery that the guy at the dishwasher, the guy who's like scrubbing out pots and pans, he's kind of deep. He's got some nuggets of wisdom. And so the brothers would like find their way going downstairs and go to the kitchen and like listen to Brother Lawrence's teachings. I mean, can you say that a dishwasher has teachings? But he had teachings, and people kept coming, and people kept coming, and pretty soon it was more than just the monks would go to hang out with Brother Lawrence in the kitchen and hear this wisdom that he had to offer, until eventually news of this remarkable dishwasher got to the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris. And so the Cardinal Archbishop went and made a visit to Brother Lawrence in the kitchen. And you can imagine, like, the Cardinal walks into the kitchen, is like, hey, Brother Lawrence, you want to chat? He was like, what? Like, who wants to talk to me? And I think Brother Lawrence thought that there was like some nefarious reason the cardinal was there. And then when he realized that the cardinal just generally wanted to talk with him, Brother Lawrence relaxed and they just talked. And the cardinal wrote down this conversation. We still have this conversation. It makes up the bulk of a book that is one of the most celebrated classics of Western spirituality, called Brother Lawrence's Practicing the Presence of God. You can go on Amazon today and purchase this book by a 17th century shoeless monk dishwasher, and you will find just the most incredible spiritual depth there. The sort of the foundation of Brother Lawrence's teaching, his understanding of life, was that we are deeply connected with God. And not just when we do like religious stuff, not just when we're in church or in a cathedral, not just when we have our prayer book open, but that God is always present with us. And if God is always present with us, then every moment is an opportunity for prayer. Not to like stop what you're doing and start praying. Not like, okay, I got to finish this email and then I can go pray. His thing was, no, this email that you type out can be your prayer. You do that with God. Here's one of the things that Brother Lawrence says. He says, people invent means and methods of coming at God's love. They learn rules and set up devices to remind them of that love. And it seems like a world of trouble to bring oneself into the consciousness of God's presence. Like there's all these like techniques and there's these tools and there's these books. But do you really need all that? He continues, yet it might be so simple. Is it not quicker and easier just to do our common business wholly for the love of Him? And so one of the famous things about Brother Lawrence is Brother Lawrence is a dishwasher. He washed dishes for God. He washed dishes with God. He knew wherever he was, whatever he was doing, he was surrounded by God's presence. He was filled with God's presence. And so it didn't matter if he was just scouring a pot. He was scouring a pot surrounded and filled with God's presence. And he would use that as a means of prayer. He writes, it's not needful that we should have great things to do. We can do little things for God. I turn the cake that is frying on the pan for love of Him. It is enough for me to pick up but a straw from the ground for the love of God. We have there's this like myth of how we relate with God. That God is this separate being and God is like way out there, like a million miles away, right? And what's God doing? Well, God's doing God knows what, right? And then here I am, and I'm doing what I'm doing. And there you are doing what you're doing. And everyone else is a little island to themselves doing what they're doing. And what Brother Lawrence says is, no, God isn't. I mean, God is a million miles away, but God is also here and here and there. And so wherever we are, whatever we are doing it with God. And if we just turn our consciousness to that, it doesn't matter if we're mowing the lawn, we don't have to stop mowing the lawn and be like, okay, I got to go pray. Like mowing the lawn can be prayer. Going to the grocery store can be prayer. Washing the dishes can be prayer. Driving to work, if we're still driving to work, can be prayer. Playing tennis, golf. We are doing it not apart from God, because God's not a million miles away. We are doing it surrounded and filled with God. And this is, of course, not just what Brother Lawrence said in the 17th century, it's what Jesus says. Jesus says, I love this. I will not leave you orphaned. You could just sit with that for today and just, Jesus does not leave us orphaned. He says, I am coming to you, and on that day you will know that I, Jesus, am in my Father. So Jesus is in God the Father. And then he says, and you are in me, Jesus. So we're in Jesus. Jesus is in the Father, so we're in the Father. And then he says, and I, Jesus, am in you. You're in me, I'm in you, and we're in God. We are all connected. One of the things I think, one of the learnings I'm getting from this time is just how connected we are. One thing, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. When I email and message back and forth with friends on other continents, it's not like we're dealing with something that they're not. The entire globe is connected in this pandemic. But you remember that time a long time ago, like February, where you would go to the store, grocery store maybe, and you saw a box. Maybe it was a box of cereal, a box of pasta, a box of Pop-Tarts, no judgment, and you grabbed the box, you pulled it off the shelf, and you went to look at it, and you went to look at its ingredients, you went to look at its calorie count, or its carbohydrate count, or its fat count, or something like that, and then after reading whatever you were looking for, you realized you didn't want it, and so you took this box you've been touching and handling and breathing on, and you just took the box and you put it back on the shelf like a maniac. Do you remember that time back in February we did that? Now we do that. We touch that box. We are incredibly aware that we are now connected to everyone who touched that box prior, because they were handling it and breathing on it, and their germs are now on it. Everyone else who picked up that box and looked at it, we're connected to them. The person who stocked the shelf, the person who went by at night and straightened the shelves and pulled the boxes out so they were flat, the person who took the boxes off the conveyor belt and stuck them in the pallet, we're connected to all of them. And if we put that box back on the shelf, after touching it and breathing on it, everyone who touches that box afterwards is connected to us. Every doorknob, every shopping cart handle. Don't you think about it every time you touch something? Who's touched that? And who's going to touch that after me? We are connected. There's two ways, there's probably more ways, but there's at least two ways of studying frogs, okay? You can take a frog and do what a lot of us did in middle school. The frog comes to us hopefully already dead, and we pin it to a board, and we take our scalpel, and we run it down the center, and we pull it open, and we pull out its heart, and we pull out its liver, and we pull out its spleen. I don't even know if frogs have spleens, but we put them all out and we label them. It's one way of studying a frog is you take it and you just kind of rip it apart, right? The other way of studying frogs is stick with me, you leave the frog alive and you observe it in its environment. And you see how this frog is connected to, affected by, and affects this rock with moss on it, and how it affects this plant that's next to the rock, and how it affects every creature that it sees as food, and how it affects every creature that sees it as food. It's not just this one lone frog. This frog is connected to everything in its environment. But then that environment isn't just even an isolated thing, because these flowers bloom and make seeds, and those seeds are blown over to this other environment over here. And birds come and they eat stuff here and they fly to this environment over here. And all of a sudden you pull the lens back. That frog is connected to the whole earth. If that frog can be connected to everything in its environment and to the earth, then how much more are we connected to God? And how much more are we then connected to each other? Because if Jesus is in me and I'm in Jesus, and Jesus is in you and you're in Jesus, then somehow we're in Jesus together. And Jesus is in us together. And what holds us together isn't just the doorknobs that we touch and the handles that we touch and the boxes that we pull off the shelf and breathe on, but we are bound together in the love of God. And so there is, and one of the questions that pops up every once in a while, why is God allowing this to happen? Why we're in this global pandemic and people are suffering. Why does God allow this to happen? That question, it's a profound question, but it harkens back to the myth of that God who's way out there, a million miles away, doing God knows what, and we're down here dealing with the stuff that God's doing. No. God's here. If we're suffering, then God is suffering with us, in us, through us. If we're celebrating, then God is celebrating with us and in us and through us. If we're sad, if we're angry, if we're scared, if we don't know what to do, we aren't doing that apart from God, in the shadow of God. We're doing it surrounded by God and filled with God. And we're doing it surrounded by other people who are also surrounded by and filled by God. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. And so today, wash the dishes, or mow the lawn, or take a walk, or answer some email, or weed the garden bed outside. But whatever you do that small thing for the love of God.